If you ask the average person what number changes a financial life, he will usually say $100,000. If he has spent more time online, he may say 1 million. Those numbers sound serious. They sound respectable. They sound like the kind of milestones people are supposed to admire. And because they sound large, people assume they must also be the moments where life changes the most. I do not think that is true. I think the first $10,000 changes a person far more deeply than most larger milestones do. Not because 10,000 makes you rich. It does not. Not because 10,000 solves everything. It does not. It matters because 10,000 is usually the first moment when money stops behaving only like an emergency and starts behaving like a system. That is an enormous shift. I have spent most of my life around businesses, markets, balance sheets, and people who thought money would become simple once they got more of it. The older I get, the less I believe in glamorous milestones and the more I believe in structural thresholds. There are certain numbers that do not impress the world very much but completely change the way a person lives inside his own financial life. 10,000 is one of those numbers. It is the first real line between constant fragility and the beginning of control. The public does not respect it because the public likes large numbers, flatter fantasy. 10,000 flatters discipline. That is why it matters. Most people spend years moving inside the same narrow range, a few hundred in checking, a little in savings, then a bill arrives, then the number drops, then the paycheck repairs some of the damage, then something else happens. A repair, a birthday, a school expense, a medical visit, a plane ticket because life did not ask whether the timing was convenient. And the person returns to the same place again. That cycle is exhausting. It does not only drain money, it drains the mind. It teaches a person that every month is a short negotiation with pressure. It teaches him that the future is always waiting for permission from the present. It teaches him to think in emergencies, not in compounding. That is what being stuck below 10,000 often means. You are not building. You are stabilizing, destabilizing, and restabilizing. You are patching. You are surviving. There is nothing dishonorable about surviving, but survival mode is not where wealth begins. Wealth begins the moment margin becomes real enough that not every surprise needs to be financed with stress. That is why the first 10,000 matters so much before 10,000. Many people are living on timing. After 10,000, at least some of them begin living on structure. That is a profound difference. When your total liquid money still has 4 digits, the mind behaves differently. A $1,000 expense can feel like a violent event. A car repair is not a repair, it is a threat. A delay in payroll is not an inconvenience. It is a crisis. A broken appliance is not an annoying household issue. It is an emotional tax on the weak. That is what people with plenty of money do not always understand. Financial stress is not only about having less, it is about having too little distance between yourself and the next disruption. That distance is what savings buys. It buys not just dollars, it buys time to think, time to compare, time to refuse bad terms, time to delay the wrong decision, time to not turn every event into debt. That is why the number matters. $10,000 will not put you in the class of the wealthy. It will put you in a different psychological class than the one you were in before. That is the beginning of everything. Now, I want to explain why I think this number matters more than 50,000 or 100,000 in one specific sense. Bigger numbers often change the scale of life. 10,000 changes the feel of life. By the time a person reaches 100,000, he already knows some things. He knows he can save. He knows he can invest. He knows the machine works if he feeds it. The leap to 100,000 is meaningful, yes, but it usually confirms an identity that was already forming. The leap to 10,000 often creates the identity for the first time. That is why it is so powerful. It is the first proof. And proof is one of the most valuable financial assets in the world. People underestimate that. They talk about confidence as though confidence were an abstract emotional luxury. Real confidence in money usually comes from evidence. You saved, you did not die. The account grew, life happened, you still held the line. That is evidence. Once a person sees 5 digits in the account for the first time, something happens in his head that no lecture can fully reproduce. Money stops being mythical, it becomes manageable. That is a life-changing transition. Before that moment, saving can feel like a moral exercise, something admirable people say you should do, something older people recommend, something financial books describe, something the future version of you will probably get more serious about when life calms down. Then you hit 10,000 and the abstract idea becomes physical reality. You say to yourself, I actually did this. That sentence matters. I actually did this, because if you can do this once, you can do other things too. You can build 20, you can build 50, you can build 100. The larger numbers no longer feel like they belong only to another class of human beings. They begin to feel like extensions of a system you now understand. That is why 10,000 is more powerful than people realize. It breaks the spell of permanent insufficiency. Now let me talk about the first way it changes a person. It changes self-trust. This may sound too soft for a discussion of money, but the longer I live, the more I believe self-trust is one of the hidden engines behind every strong balance sheet. A person who has never held meaningful cash often behaves as though money is always slipping through him. He does not fully believe he can hold it, he can earn it, he can receive it, he can watch it pass by. Holding it feels different. Holding requires design. Holding requires saying no repeatedly without applause. Holding requires seeing temptation and refusing to relabel it as necessity. Holding requires a type of quiet control that many people have simply never practiced long enough to experience. So when you first hit 10,000, you are not merely seeing a number. You are seeing proof that you can hold. That is not small. People who can hold usually learn to invest better. They learn to wait better. They negotiate better. They panic less. They do not need every dollar to perform immediately. They stop behaving like prey. And that is what many early savers have really been until then. Pray for fees, pray for urgency, pray for convenience, pray for bad financing, pray for every institution that makes money from a person who cannot wait. This is one reason I think 10,000 does more than protect. It changes posture below it. Many people stand financially hunched above it. For the first time, they begin standing up. Now, the second reason this milestone matters is compounding. Everyone loves to repeat the phrase compound interest. Almost nobody respects what it really means in the beginning. People imagine a magical force that starts working the moment they buy their first share of anything. That is not how it feels in real life. At very small numbers, compounding is technically present and emotionally invisible. If you invest a little and make a little, you are pleased for a moment. Then life spends 10 times more emotional energy, pulling your attention toward the next bill. That is the problem. Tiny balances do not only grow slowly, they fail to command respect from their owner. And because they fail to command respect, they are often interrupted. Money gets pulled back out. The account is raided. A minor emergency arrives. A small indulgence gets rationalized. A month of weak discipline quietly reverses progress. That is what makes the early phase so hard. Compounding is trying to begin at the exact stage where human beings are least likely to leave it alone. The first 10,000 changes that not because the math suddenly becomes incredible overnight, because the pile becomes meaningful enough that the owner finally starts treating it like a machine. That is what compounding needs: respect. The source text you gave me uses a simple example that helps show the principle. If someone saves and invests $1,000 per year at 7%, it might take roughly 7.5 years to reach the first 10,000, but the next 10,000 comes faster because the first pile is now helping. The details of the illustration are less important to me than the direction of the truth. Once the pile exists, your contributions are no longer alone. The machine begins participating. Fe felicite fe turn 73 file 0 fe. That is what people feel once they cross 5 figures. Not wealth assistance. The account is no longer just waiting. It is now contributing. That changes how a person views every future dollar. A raise becomes more valuable because it can feed something real. A tax refund becomes more valuable because it can accelerate something real. A side income stream becomes more valuable because it can enlarge something real before 10,000. Every new dollar often feels defensive after 10,000. Many dollars start feeling offensive. That is another huge transition. And because of that, the mindset begins changing too. Now, I need to say something important here. I do not think 10,000 is magic. I think it is a threshold. There is a difference. A threshold changes what the next step feels like. It does not complete the journey. That is another reason it matters more than very large milestones in some ways. 100,000 might be admired by other people. 10,000 changes the owner's relationship with the game itself. It tells him the game is real and winnable. Now let us talk about emergencies, because this is where the number becomes emotionally practical. The source correctly points out that most ordinary emergencies do not exceed $10,000, and that most are much smaller than that. It mentions a personal car repair example around $2,000 and makes the broader point that $10,000 often covers 99% of the things that randomly go wrong in everyday life. I would not use the exact 99% number as a law of nature for every household in every city, but the direction is right. 10,000 is enough to stop a very large number of ordinary problems from becoming system events. Fe Phalocite Fe turn 73 file 0 Fe that matters more than people realize. If your car needs repair and you have $300, the event is not only mechanical, it becomes financial, then emotional, then logistical, then maybe professional if you cannot get to work, then maybe relational if you need to borrow, then maybe credit related if you finance it badly. This is how fragile lives become expensive. A $1,000 problem becomes a multi-month event. 10,000 does not make all pain disappear. It stops pain from multiplying quite so quickly. This is the key difference between inconvenience and instability. A stable household can absorb bad luck. An unstable household has to negotiate with it. That negotiation is what ruins people. That is why I treat the first 10,000 as self-insurance. Not because it eliminates risk, because it prevents the dumbest downstream costs, interest, late fees, panic, bad decisions, desperation pricing, shame. You are not just saving money by having the reserve, you are often saving judgment. That is a much deeper form of wealth. Now the fourth change is freedom in decision making. I think this is one of the least discussed and most important effects of crossing the first real savings threshold. When a person has almost nothing behind him, he cannot negotiate. Honestly, he may use the language of negotiation, he may say he is considering options, he may tell himself he is being strategic. Often he is simply choosing the least bad thing under pressure. That is not real choice. Real choice requires the ability to say no without immediately falling apart. $10,000 begins to buy that. Not complete independence, not permanent safety, but enough breathing room that you no longer feel forced to take every offer, accept every rate, or tolerate every bad arrangement. This affects work. This affects housing. This affects financing. This affects health. This affects relationships. It is amazing how often bad money decisions are really timing decisions made under invisible pressure. The person accepts the wrong loan because he cannot wait. He keeps the wrong job because he cannot wait. He buys the cheapest thing, not the best value thing, because he cannot wait. He delays the right move because he cannot withstand the short-term cost of making it. This is why the source says that once you have 10,000, you can start asking what is the best value rather than only what is the cheapest. That is a deceptively simple point, but it is one of the most consequential in the whole piece. When you are not under constant scarcity pressure, you begin making longer horizon purchases. That can mean better shoes, better food, better tools, better choices, fewer replacements, and a generally more rational life. Fe Phalocite Fe turn 73 file 0 Fe. This is not luxury thinking. This is value thinking, and the difference matters. Poor people are often forced into repeated cheapness. Wealthy people buy longevity, durability, and fewer errors. 10,000 is often the first line where someone can begin behaving more like the second category than the first. That is a major change. Now let me talk about investing access. The source is right that before 10,000 many investment decisions feel too small to matter. If you have only $2,000 total in the world, putting $100 into something may be mathematically fine and psychologically trivial. The gain will be tiny, the risk of needing the money back out feels large. The whole process can feel unserious. That is one reason many people never build the habit. The amounts are too small to command respect, and the life around them is too fragile to let the investment remain untouched. Fe Phalocite Fe turn 73 file 0 Fe at 10,000. Something changes. Now the emergency layer and the investment layer can begin separating. That separation is enormous. Before it, every invested dollar may still secretly belong to the next emergency. After it, a person can begin saying this portion stays invested and that portion protects me. That is when real wealth behavior starts. I do not think enough people understand that wealth is built, not only by buying assets, but by assigning jobs, clearly emergency money, opportunity money, retirement money, tax money, lifestyle money, when all money is blended together in one emotional bucket. The whole structure remains weak. 10,000 often makes the first true separation possible. And once that happens, the person's relationship to the future changes. Now he can fund a Roth IRA more seriously. Now he can buy full shares without feeling silly. Now he can start a side venture without it threatening basic survival. Now he can let time begin doing some of the work. That is why I say 10,000 is the beginning of money behaving like a tool instead of a daily threat. Now there is another emotional shift buried inside the source that I think deserves much more attention. Financial anxiety begins to fade. Not disappear, fade. This is crucial. A great many people live inside a permanent low-level hum of money fear. They are not always naming it. They may even appear calm to others. But inside, every purchase passes through a layer of stress. Every unexpected email is slightly threatening. Every bill opening is a small emotional tax. Every silence after a job application feels larger than it should. Every month carries the question of whether this will be the month something stupid happens. That is exhausting. And exhausted people make worse decisions. This is one of the reasons financial stress is so cruel. It does not only hurt because of the numbers, it degrades the quality of thought itself. The source describes this well, saying that once a person reaches 10,000, the background noise of financial anxiety starts to fade and a more abundant mindset can begin emerging. That may sound like self-help language to some people, but the deeper claim is sound. When you are no longer always one small surprise away from visible damage, the mind widens, and a wider mind sees more opportunities than a narrow one. Fay Philosite Fay turn 73, file 0, Fay scarcity compresses time. Margin expands it. That is what 10,000 starts to buy. Now, I want to say something hard. Many people will reach 10,000 and still fail. That sounds rude. It is not meant that way. It is simply the truth that crossing the line does not matter unless you understand what the line is for. If you hit 10,000 and instantly reinterpret it as spending capacity, then the milestone was wasted. If you hit 10,000 and decide that now you finally deserve the car upgrade, the better apartment, the celebratory trip, the giant discretionary purchase, then you have confused a foundation for a finish line. That is one of the saddest financial mistakes people make. They finally build the first real floor and then use the existence of the floor as an excuse to start cutting holes in it. I do not want that. 10,000 should be treated as a base, not a trophy. It should be defended, respected, protected, then built above. This is another reason the milestone changes identity. It teaches a person that some money is not for spending simply because it exists. Some money exists to change the texture of life by not moving. That is a mature idea. And once a person learns it, much larger numbers become easier to handle. Now, let us talk about how people actually get there, because I do not like giving people large emotional conclusions without showing the practical machinery underneath them. The path to the first 10,000 is not mysterious. It is just harder than the internet likes. First, a person must know what his real monthly leakage is, not what he guesses, what he knows. There is no serious path to 5 figures without a period of scrutiny. Where is the money going? What is recurring? What is vanity? What is convenience? What is genuine quality of life? And what is simply habit wearing nicer language? Second, the person needs some kind of automatic transfer. The source talks about speed running to 10,000, and while I do not love juvenile language around serious money, I do understand the spirit. The faster a person gets to the first real buffer, the faster the whole rest of life becomes structurally easier. That means automation matters. Waiting to save what remains at the end of the month is usually just another way of telling the future to survive on leftovers. It rarely works well. Fay Philocite, Fay Turn 73, File 0, Fay 3rd. Income still matters. I would never insult a struggling person by pretending this is all about mindset. Mindset matters after structure exists, before structure exists. Arithmetic matters more. If costs cannot be cut enough to produce a meaningful surplus, then earnings must rise. This is why I always tell people that the early phase of wealth building is mostly a cash flow engineering problem. It is not a portfolio problem yet. Fourth, the person must learn to use windfalls intelligently, tax refunds, bonuses, side income, unexpected checks. Many people never hit 10,000 because every time life hands them a temporary accelerant, they consume it as though the machine were already built. Number until the first true buffer exists. Windfalls are not celebrations, they are tools. This is how ordinary people pull forward years of progress. Not by becoming geniuses, by not wasting accelerants. Now here is another subtle truth. Once a person hits 10,000, the next 10 often comes much faster. Not only because of compounding, because of behavior. The person now trusts the system more. He sees the point more clearly. He treats money with less panic and more intention. He begins noticing opportunities he would have been too psychologically tired to see before. He may negotiate better at work. He may invest more coherently. He may build side income with less desperation. He may simply make fewer stupid decisions because the whole life is no longer vibrating with the same level of strain. That is why I think the first 10,000 changes life the most. It starts a virtuous cycle. You become calmer. You think better. You decide better. Your money lasts longer. Your savings rise faster. Your confidence strengthens. The world stops feeling quite so hostile. And because the world feels less hostile, you stop reacting to it with the same degree of fear. That is real wealth in its early form, not abundance in the silly social media sense. Control, just enough control to stop behaving like a victim of every bill, every timing problem, and every little accident of life. And once control appears, everything else becomes easier to build. That is why I do not worship six figures. I respect them. I do not worship millions. I respect them too. But the number I truly respect is the first one that teaches a person that money can sit still long enough to start working for him instead of only against him. For a great many ordinary people, that number is 10,000. Not because it makes them finished, because it makes them possible. That is a much bigger deal than most larger milestones ever get credit for.